Welcome back, everybody, to the Jim Rathmann Show. I'm your host, Jim Rathmann. Got another 764 case I'm going to bring to you. This one is Tony Christopher Long out of California. Before we dive into this, just a quick shout out to Podgo Services for bringing you this podcast, and also to Hi Hello Labs in Orlando, Florida, for bringing you this wonderful set, the editing, the video, and putting together this great content. So I'm going to dive into this one. You heard what we had to say last week about Vernon, Connecticut. Now we're going to do another one. Tony Christopher Long out of Porterville, California, which is north of LA. I'm assuming a couple hours northeast of LA. Wow. It's another shocking one. This one involves animals and sexual exploiting children for sexual photos and child pornography. But this Tony Christopher Long was indicted back in October of 2025. Going back into 2024, there's numerous things that Tony decided to do as being a member of 764. Just disgusting. A federal grand jury indicted California teenager on 6 felony counts, including animal crushing, sexual exploitation of a minor from Washington State, possession of child sexual abuse material, cyberstalking, and interstate threats, all resulting in a possible sentence up to 76 years if convicted. He went by the aliases, or his screen names, I should say, his online profiles: Inactive, Inactive Zero, Inactive CVX. When he was definitely a part of the 764 nihilistic violent extremist. And again, he continued to harm and prey on children. He engaged in cyber stalking and attempted extortion of a juvenile in Kern County starting in October of 2024. He had child pornography or sexually explicit photos sent to him in November of 24, where he coerced a minor in Washington State into providing him this material, which was later found. He used his extremist tactics, that nihilistic, violent extremist tactics, where, they engage these kids and get them to commit harm to themselves, stabbing themselves, marking 764 on their body, self-mutilation. He did that as well. With 764, that is the main topic, because it gets you to hurt yourself. It's disgusting. I'm shocked. Every time I read another one of these cases, my world is just blown away at just how cruel and how disgusting of a society we live in. When Long here, Mr. Long, how he was caught. He was already in state custody on related charges when a federal grand jury returned that 6-count indictment. They used the Project Safe Childhood initiative to marshal the resources necessary to link him to all these animal abuse, the threat patterns, all the threats online. They traced his digital footprint. Inactive. They use it across multiple platforms, and they were able to come out with this indictment. So he's looking at possibly 76 years in prison, and rightfully so. So here's just some of the timeline here. October 10th through the 11th of 2024. Mr. Long allegedly targets minor victim number 2 in Kern County, using online messaging to engage in cyberstalking and sending interstate threats with the intent to extort. So if you don't understand what the extorting is, hey, I got these nude photos of you. You either do this to yourself, harm yourself. In other instances, pay $50,000 and we'll release it. We won't make it public. But if you don't pay and you don't meet our ransom on it, we're going to exploit you everywhere. That's what extortion is. getting something in return. It's illegal. But that's what he did October 10th through October 11th of 2024. November 11th of 2024. Long is accused of coercing a minor victim number 1, a resident out of Washington State, into sexually explicit conduct to produce child sexual abuse material, also known as CSAM. November 24th, 2024. It's the first documented instance of Mr. Long crushing an animal. You heard that right. Crushing an animal. He tortured this poor animal. Fall for the visual media. And crushed this animal. This continued all the way until December 10th of 2024 of crushing and mutilating animals. Sick. And the more that they're able to do, the more harm they're able to bring, the more violent they seem to be, is the more status they get within that 764 culture. This ideology that has been deemed now to be modern terrorism. This is disgusting. What the heck has this world gotten to that this is what teenagers are engaging in these days and trying to hurt children? It's sickening. You heard last week when we talked about Vernon, Connecticut, and we talked about the threats that were going on there and hacking your account and holding your account hostage until you meet the demands. You heard what the detective had to say when he came on here and gave measures of, one, how they're finding it, but more importantly, how to protect your child. Because that's what needs to happen here. The faster and the more we can get this information out there, hopefully we can uncover where there's problems. The FBI can come in, your local law enforcement agencies can come in with the resources they have and put these criminals behind bars forever. It is absolutely necessary. And I'm just blown away at just how violent, sick, and twisted this world has become. I mean, this is terrible. And these are kids, and they're being targeted as young as age of 8, 9 years old. I mean, my goodness, they should be watching Bluey and other cartoon programs, and yet they're going online to play a game like Minecraft, and they're being targeted. It's insane. So I'm going to bring on a guest, and Ali is going to come on, and I'm going to get into a more intro here in just a minute. But you want to talk about someone spent a lot of time understanding the terminology, understanding the origins of this, what to look for when you're going through your child's gaming systems or iPads or computers, anything that they have. They're literally going to break this down for you so that way you can see and protect your own child. We have to arm you with this knowledge. And I ask that you spread this amongst your friends, amongst your families, because it's the best way to get this information out there. We only know what we're told about. I knew nothing of this 764 culture. I knew of the sextortion that would take place. I've obviously heard of that happening over the last few years, but I did not know how sick and twisted this really is until we started diving into it recently. And I just feel compelled in my heart to do everything that I can to bring as much knowledge to you as the listeners to protect your own children or to protect somebody you know that has a child. So I'm going to bring on this guest. They're going to give you some great ideas, some great tips, and great techniques to prevent anything from happening to your child. As I told you guys before, I wanted to bring on special guests and those that have a lot of experience working on this nihilistic, violent extremism. I'm going to bring on a guest right now, Ali Winston. All right, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Ali Winston. He's an award-winning independent investigative journalist specializing in the intersection of criminal justice, surveillance, and violent extremism. With over a decade of reporting experience, his work has been featured in premier publications including the New York Times, The Guardian, Rolling Stones, Wired. Ali is widely recognized for his deep dive reporting into the darkest corners of the internet, particularly concerning the rise of nihilistic violent extremism, also known as NVE. He has been at the forefront of documenting the evolution of accelerationist groups and occult influence networks, including your 764 and all the little subsidies that come with it. So without further ado, Ali, how you doing?
I'm all right. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on our show here to talk about your vast experiences you've had in looking into these extremist groups online. And we're hoping to get a lot of knowledge and understanding, and also hopefully ways that we can protect our kids at home, because this is some scary stuff. So, for you, I know you spent years investigating and reporting on this, everything from what is it? 09A, I believe. And there's like a ton of these 764 and these other little groups that have formed from it. Kind of talk to me a little bit about how you came about this and what started your investigative journalism with this.
My background is as a criminal justice reporter, and I tended to focus a lot on police accountability, just the broader aspects of the criminal justice system. In 2017, 2016, and I lived in California for a long time, a lot of the street gang elements, the kind of woodpile, if you will, the Aryan Brotherhood, skinhead gangs up and down the state started to get political. It brought me, by the beginning of 2018, into the Atomwaffen division, which is an important kind of point of departure. They were a millenarian neo-Nazi network of young white men. I want to say the oldest of them was maybe 25, 27, and they were devoted to kind of, seeking to bring down American society through acts of sabotage, murder, social disruption, and create a Fourth Reich. By and large, that organization was not successful in this, although they did they were lethal. They did commit 5 homicides, and they were broken up by a pretty sustained FBI investigation in 2020. But that organization and their lifespan is really where I first came into contact with the Order of Nine Angles. By 2018, the Atomwaffen division, after its initial founder was locked up on explosive charges, Brandon Russell, the group that succeeded him was actually run by a couple 09A adherents. And that was very influential because they put certain books into play, into the group's cadre as required reading that came from a particular guy. It came from Joshua Sutter, who ran an Order of Nine Angles Nexion called the Temple of Blood. Sutter's important because he is the main publisher of Order of Nine Angles books in the United States, literature. And it's been around since the 70s, by the way, 70s and 80s. It was created in Britain by a militant named David Myatt, who's still alive, and he's another story. But the bottom line is, by 2019, 2020, the 09A influence was everywhere. And that's important because the main publisher, the main proponent of this in the United States, Joshua Sutter, turns out he's an FBI informant and had been an FBI informant since 2003. His work was essential in bringing the Atomwaffen division to heel. But at the same time, the blowback of his involvement and his work as an informant, for which he was paid over $140,000 at least, that's as of 2021, is that he pushed this really noxious, violent, manipulative ideology out into the broader ecosystem, and it's had really nasty and unexpected consequences.
So he was paid $140,000 as an informant?
At least. And that was as of 2021, when he testified in a federal trial in Washington State for Atomwaffen division member Caleb Cole.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the reason why I mention him is that in paying attention to the propaganda networks and social media conduits through which the Atomwaffen Division and other similarly inspired, similarly inclined neo-Nazis pushed out their own influence and own material, including like the Teragram Collective, the Base. This is a whole nother universe we don't have to get into. That's where I first noticed 7604 material. In about 2021, that's when I started to see these really aggressive, highly stylized short video edits of really lurid material online, and then just this kind of number flashed up there on the screen, either outlined in bullet casings or imposed in a stylized logo that was on top of a Baphomet symbol. Yeah.
So
that's where it is.
I know with the evolution of 764, in your reporting, you described 764 as a satanic neo-Nazi cult that prioritizes sadism over traditional ideology. How did this nihilistic approach make them more dangerous or harder to track than traditional extremist groups?
So 764 are actually not hard to track. They're really easy to find out, to find their real identities and actually pull them across because of a few things. They are young. Young people leave a tremendous amount of digital breadcrumbs to their identity. And also because this is a network that it really kind of centers on child exploitation and manipulation and abuse. It initially spun out of two worlds. It initially spun out of a broader internet phenomenon that's called COM, COM, which is short for community. And COM was more of a hacking and SIM swapping carding group that sought to, hackers like to either they're in the game for either money or notoriety. And the latter strain, I think, is really more influential and more important when it comes to discussing how 764 came about, because these kids, what they sought to do is gain access to compromising material on potential victims, and then force them to abuse themselves or abuse other people in order to make themselves feel better, feel more powerful, feel influential, gain notoriety on the internet. The earliest versions of this came about in 2020 through something called Greg's Cult, which is a little internet group of abusers and manipulators that Bradley Cadenhead, the teenager who founded 764, took part in. And that's where he learned how to manipulate people, how to groom them. And then he created his own version of this group online, 764, which is taken from his own zip code. And he termed it his own cult. Cadenhead who is currently serving several decades in prison. He won't get out until he's at least eligible for his AARP card. He really he set out to create a cult of personality. He had already the kid had a really rough childhood, which is no excuse, but he grew up in an abusive household. Substance abuse was prevalent. But he'd already been searching out. He spent most of his early years online, and he'd been searching for violent material, for abusive material online. He was actually on juvenile probation by the age of 13 for threatening to blow up his school. The court records I've obtained through my initial reporting on this showed that he was reported dozens of times to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That's how he was identified. There were dozens of reports of people who were being coerced to cutting themselves, to crushing their animal, sharing child pornography, that sort of thing. And that's how the local authorities were able to identify him. Unfortunately, he was convicted in 2023, I believe. I don't think, in fact, my initial report on 764 was in late 2023. The larger piece I did for Wired was in 2024, early 24. By that juncture, the FBI actually had not identified the victims who had been abused by Cadenhead, even though they'd had that information for several years. I just don't think they connected the dots.
Right.
And that case was initially passed on to local law enforcement in Stevensville, Texas. So the feds weren't across it. But yeah, that he was not alone. There were dozens of people in his servers. And over time, as 764 gained notoriety, either by the outrageous conduct of its participants or through arrests. There was a guy named Angel Almeida, a guy out of Queens, who he was an ex-con. He had a prior conviction in Florida, served prison time. He's young, maybe not even 27 by now. But he was brought in by the feds in New York, in Queens, on a gun charge. And when they went through his computers and devices, they found extensive evidence of child pornography, of, coercing people to cut themselves for him. A lot of Order of Nine Angles related material, including a Temple of Blood flag that he featured in a photograph that he posted to Instagram, and enough material for them to actually charge him with statutory rape.
So essentially, some good police work on making an arrest for illegal gun possession ended up turning into a lot of dots being connected and kind of exposing this case and kind of blowing it up a little bit, opening it up so that way they could start figuring out what the heck is going on. That's pretty much what happened here with him, huh?
Yeah, Almeida's case was the anchor for the broader FBI investigation. And it really sprawled out from there quite quickly. His case was the first time in his docket. That's where 764 was first mentioned in the federal court system.
Mm-hmm.
And by the FBI, that's where they first established on court paper, what 764 was in terms of group. Within, I think by late 2023, that's when the FBI issued their initial warning about what 764 was and who they would target. And this is important, I think, to raise this back up now. The initial warning that the FBI issued also not only described what 764 was and the different subgroups, names, splinters, what have you, that also were involved in similar conduct. It's worth keeping in mind that each one of these things is basically like its own server with their own person in charge. It's, people want to establish their own place in social order. Unfortunately, a lot of the way that I think about 764 is basically like what it is. The internet is as a digital, schoolyard, and these are all little cliques. It's their kids trying to establish their own place, their own social grouping, their own pecking order. But unfortunately, the way they do it is by abusing the shit out of each other. And kids are cruel, right? And this world, the oldest person, there's one person I've ever seen in 2 years, 3 years of looking into this group who's over the age of 30. Everybody else is juveniles. These are children abusing other children oftentimes.
Yeah, that's what it seems to be, at least with everything I've been able to read and figure out is they start out, most of them are even starting out as victims, but
some do, yeah. No, definitely. It's pretty grim.
I know earlier you mentioned the word COM, C-O-M, right, which stands for the community. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
So you often refer to the COM or the broader community these groups inhabit. Now, I know you looked into Tony Long, that 19-year-old out of California. I think it's north of or around the Bakersfield area, somewhere in through there. But how was he able to kind of navigate through, or how was he able to find his way in the world and on, the social currency, and kind of go about his business unrecognized for a little while?
Well, I think that his handle, unfortunately, right. inactive, is very smart. It's a very smart handle to have because that's the term that comes up in a lot of social media platforms for an account that's no longer around. It's tough to pin someone down, but honestly, I think that his, Animal Crush is definitely part of the world that we're dealing with, but I think it depends. He's 19, so when this thing kicked off, he would have been, 4 years ago, 15, 16. There were people in this network who were far more pressing targets than him. And it's not minimizing what he did. He's involved in sexual exploitation of a minor. That's nasty. I think he is also charged, if court documents are correct, he's also charged with trying to abuse he's accused of making threats against a minor victim who lived in his area in Kern County in California. But there are people out there in this world who are taking part in fire bombings, who are soliciting murder for hire, who are committing stabbings for the benefit or entertainment of their fellow cult members, and are live streaming it. I mean, those are the people who were prioritized in the initial, I want to say, year and a half of this this federal investigation. And it's not just in the U.S. too. There's a huge international component. Germany, Great Britain, Sweden, Bulgaria, Greece, France, like it's Holland. It's really all.
Yeah, it's a worldwide threat.
Brazil. No, it's very unfortunate, but I just think that it's important to keep in mind that this is really inchoate stuff. It's very kind of scattershot in terms of how these guys find each other. It tends to be through servers, through their shared interest in gore. That's a big entryway into this, is the sheer prevalence of channels on mainstream social media apps, including Instagram, of just really ultra violent content. And that's how people get initially introduced to this world. And they kind of desensitize themselves to it. I mean, kids will push limits. Teenagers are they do seek out thrills. They do try to transgress. It's not new behavior. The difference now is that there's this, I think, being behind, having the filter of a screen, and not, the fact that there's no in-person communication with these folks oftentimes means that they're they're disinhibited. They don't have the same, gut check that you would have if you're talking to somebody face to face and you're like, oh, well, I have this photograph of you. You now, you have to do what I say. Otherwise I'm sending this around to the rest of your school, your family, your community. You have to cut your name into me. You have to, cut your arm so I can see the fat layer. You have to cut my name into your chest. You have to cut your tongue. You have to kill your gerbil. This sort of shit. It's just, I think a lot of this has to do with the disinhibition you have online.
And with Tony Long specifically, because we know he was crushing animals, and then you have the child exploitation. But how does all this end up destabilizing, the social order, if you will? What the group's goal is, like what?
Right. So here's where I think it's really it's difficult to make sense of what the goals of these groups are, because the acts that they engage in are so shocking and so depraved and really debased. Some people, I think the majority, from what I've seen in my reporting, the overwhelming majority of people who participate in these groups are not straight Order of Nine Angles practitioners or adherents. They've never read the texts. All they know about the ideology is the symbology and the fact that it's really nasty stuff that scares people, right? And they want to scare people. Right. And they want to have that sort of intimidating online image, so they adopt it, and they repost the images and the memes. There are genuine practitioners, mind you. Angel Almeida does have a septagram, the symbol of the Order of Nine Angles, tattooed over his heart. He did have O9A books in his house. He 100%, he had a blood pact in his possession, which is a document where somebody outlines their agreement with a demon. They cut themselves, they trace the words on the piece of paper in blood, then they believe that they're in presence of a demon. This is extremely rare within 764 and its splinter groups. I would argue that the majority of people do not have, their goal is notoriety and fame, right? Same as the Columbine shooters. That's what they want. They want to be noticed. They want to scare people, and they want to have power and control. Because oftentimes, like Cadenhead, these are really pathetic people. right? Um, and they don't have much going on in their lives aside from the internet and the people that they have drawn into them. And again,
And this fills that
going back to
void.
that, yeah, no, it fills a void. But going back to the 2023 notification the FBI put out, they had a pretty good understanding, as my colleagues and I did when we reported out our series in 2024, about who 764 and its different splinters targeted as their victims. They targeted people who were vulnerable, who had mental health problems, self-identified as such, either bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, depression, gender dysphoria. They specifically targeted people who had fluid gender identities or were queer or were trans.
Yeah, they're
So
preying on people that they see as having either, if you want to consider it, a weak part of their life or confusion or something, an illness of some sort that they can come in, capitalize on, and exploit.
yes, that's it. There was a guide that they circulated, which we cited in our reporting, um, which basically said it outlined a kind of step-by-step way to and this is, again, classic cultic behavior. It goes all the way back to Manson. You want to draw somebody in, you give them affection, you treat them as if they're the center of the world, then you push them away, and then, you kind of make them earn their way back into the inner circle or your, center of attention, to your circle of trust.
Grooming.
By forcing them to do certain things. It's classic grooming.
And I understand from your research, speaking specifically to grooming, that you've uncovered or have come across information about a manual, so to speak, of
Yep.
what a step-by-step instructions of what they're doing to be able to target these young children.
Yep, that's right. That manual was something that we unearthed in our reporting back in 2024, and it made sense. Unfortunately, the victims that we spoke to said that the way that they were treated really mirrored what was outlined in those documents. It was very sad and really difficult stuff to report. I mean, the ways in which the exploiters create these quote unquote lore books of the abuse content that their victims generate for them, really it's deeply, deeply, deeply sad. And I think that the guy who we attributed, if I'm not wrong, I believe that the individual who authored that exploitation guide, they're in custody right now. That believe that that might be a racketeering indictment, or it might be a RICO. It might be a material support for terrorism indictment. I'd have to check on that.
And then talk to me a little bit about these, what they refer to as lore book, LORE book, lore book.
Yeah, those are little compilations of photographs or videos of people cutting themselves, crushing animals, sexually exploiting themselves for the network, for the cult. And those are passed around within the server between members. That's essentially how new members are initiated into 764 and the other splinters, 8884, Cascar, cults. There are a million names for these things.
They essentially use this as blackmail then.
They use it as blackmail, but they also use it as a way to gain access into the network of exploiters. Having this material is status. And that's why I kind of outline, I lean more towards notoriety and power and control as the driving impetus for these folks, rather than genuine order of nine angles praxis, right? Of trying to bring down society through manipulation, through infiltration, through turning institutions and social bodies against themselves. In a way, yes, this entire network of abusers could be seen as very, intentional 09A praxis, but there's no mastermind pulling the strings here. These are just other kids imitating kids, and very much engaging in really nasty transgressive behavior that
Right.
does get them notoriety. I mean, they do get noticed. And there's a corollary, I think, between these kids and the kind of more recent strain of mass shooters that we're seeing, the kids who write messages on their rifles or pistols in whiteout that make reference back to not only internet culture, but also other shooters. That I think, and that does go back to Columbine, right? I do see a lot of this in the frame of celebrity and fame and notoriety.
That is exactly where it all started. Because I know at least for my days back in school, you know, the school shootings were relatively unheard of. We didn't need all the things we need today. I didn't go to school worried about somebody coming in and shooting it up. Now, we had fights like anybody else that had at their schools, but nothing to that. Columbine was kind of where everything kick-started. And it's only progressed from there. And I know directly relating to this, you know, we went from lore books, they escalate their tactics. I think one of the things that be important to know or to understand, because Tony Long was charged with some federal charges on animal cruelty. But why does animal cruelty have such a big picture into this whole operation?
Because animals are targets of opportunity. Pets are targets of opportunity. They're on hand. It's very emotionally damaging to make somebody kill their pet. And that's one of the things that, you know, these exploiters can force people to, they can regularly get victims to do that. And, you know, there's a whole subculture of Animal Crush videos online. And I think that is just what these exploiters, they like seeing it. They enjoy it. It's transgressive. It's shocking. When you get new content, great. That means that you have something that makes your name stand out online, because they have, you know, they make sure to have these things basically signed by the victims.
And so
there's always a name, 764, War, 764 Trippy. They'll typically have their victim write something in blood or in marker on the content that they send over.
And
right?
I would think, you know, with the thought process, the psychological aspect of it, if they can convince a child or to convince somebody to hurt an animal, they'll be more likely to do even more extreme things than that, because hurting your own pet or hurting an animal is kind of as we know now, it's kind of a signature for them. But they can get you to do that. They can pretty much get you to do anything else. I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah. I mean, they've coerced kids into attempting suicide. In some cases, the suicides have been, the kids have gone through with it, which is deeply depressing. We don't really have a good assessment of how many of these suicides are out there, but it is a non-zero number. It might be double digits, and hard to determine because the scope of this is so large, and the attribution, unless you see it in court documents, I mean, it's the difficulty in reporting on extremism is you want to assess what the problem is and report accurately on the group, but you also do not want to give them additional notoriety or renown through your reporting, which is frankly what they want. And that's a huge quandary, not just reporting on 764, but on extremists of any type, right? Because they do understand that half of their notoriety comes from the media, from exposure, from attention. And you want, you know, in my work all these years, I've kind of written my stories with I've done my work on this field with an eye towards accountability, towards making sure that I'm showing the world things that are not part of a criminal indictment yet, or that could be, or that should be, raising those questions about, okay, well, what conduct here is within the law, is outside of the law? Should it be? Should it not be? Are we dealing with this appropriately or not? And
got it. And kind of staying on the grooming pipeline, because I think it's really important for the listeners, because ultimately we want to be able to give enough information protecting the kids what you need to look for at home, but it seems to be pretty consistent pattern of the types of platforms they're using for the essentially as this grooming pipeline. I think it's what, Discord, Roblox, Minecraft. I heard you mention Instagram. Are there others that
Yeah,
we should be kind of concerned about, or you want to dive into
yeah.
that?
I mean, honestly, the difficulty here is that um, these folks are just going to find, the internet is like a digital playground. And there are very few safeguards there, and they'll go where the kids are. So I've seen people being groomed off of SoundCloud through
SoundCloud,
7 by
isn't that
7.
just a music download?
Yeah, but you can comment on there. There's a ton of 764 related playlists on SoundCloud.
Okay.
If you do one search for that, you'll see it. Um, Definitely off the larger gaming platforms. So Roblox, Minecraft. I don't think Fortnite. But also, it's really worth understanding that like Discord is a big. Discord has been pushing back a little bit on these guys. They do report quite often as a company. Um, Telegram is where the worst of this stuff lives, and I don't think Com or 764 or this entire world could exist without Telegram. I think Telegram is the problem. I mean, yes, Meta is a huge problem here because Instagram does not really vet for this content. You kind of have to look for it, or you have to like really report it out to the app, to the company in order to get them to take it down. And frankly, none of these big tech companies want to kick these people off the platform because their value, their stock value, is tied to this. Their value is based on user activity and time spent on app. And these people, this entire world, they spend almost all their time online.
Right.
In some ways, they're the perfect user if you look at it from purely a business perspective, right? But when you look at things from a business perspective, you take the morals out of it, and unfortunately, that's where we've gotten to.
And I think that's part of the problem is I think we need to get back to the ethical decision making, running a business, and the morals when we're talking about violence against anyone, let alone children. I understand business wise they can make money. They're getting paid off of how many hours they're spending on the app, just like you mentioned, the posts, the views, the clicks, however you want to put it. At the end of the day, I think some of these bigger companies need to be held accountable for what they're allowing to happen on their platform because they're going to end up paying astronomical amount of monies to family if they can actually pinpoint it back to their platforms. I think that's pretty
Yeah, I
fair to
mean a
say.
lot. That's accurate. I know that there's a series of lawsuits being brought by states' attorneys general. New Jersey comes to mind immediately in terms of their safety for children on the app. I mean, the lawsuits, the civil claims that I've seen, and also claims that have been brought by the families of kids who've committed suicide, thanks as a result of their exploitation. The claims appear to be brought on product safety grounds, which has been done beforehand for other forms of online exploitation and revenge pornography. I do think it's an intelligent way to go about it. We'll see if it actually does yield results. But yeah, I just think for too long, these companies have gotten away with letting really miserable shit happen on there. I mean, for instance, Telegram's nickname is Terragram, not because of the white nationalist and neo-Nazi shit that circulates on there, but because of the preference of the Islamic State for Telegram in terms of circulating their own propaganda well over 10 years ago, right? This is a known problem.
Wow. This is absolutely mind blowing. And I know that there has been there's other groups or spinoffs, 676. I think there's one you titled Harm Nation.
Yeah.
Things such as that, people like Tony, when they're arrested, I guess you can count them as a mid-level actor within that organization. When they're arrested, does this spin off? Does it have any kind of effect whatsoever on the organization, or do they just feed and only get bigger based on the notoriety of this person now being outed and made public?
It depends. I've seen different networks. I mean, honestly, it's a game of whack-a-mole with these things. One group will go down, another will come back up. And again, unless the actual platform removes their ability to post and congregate on there, I don't see this reducing. I mean, the number of folks involved in this is not decreased. If anything, it's increased. And we're seeing people who've gone to prison 4 years ago for child exploitation related charges come back out and recirculate within these social circles online, and engage in similar behavior. With that, while they're on court release, the person I'm thinking of is in Europe. They're not in the U.S. I don't know the specifics of their supervised release, but the stuff that I've seen from them does indicate that they 100% should not be allowed to be online in this manner at all.
Yeah,
It's a complicated way of saying it, but I don't think that this goes away unless I don't think a series of prosecutions is going to ultimately knock this thing out. It's going to derail this stuff. I think that will happen when you cannot get online and do these things on these platforms. I do think it has to come from a more basic level than dealing with the motivations of these individuals, because their backgrounds are so diverse. They come from so many different places. They're not geographically concentrated. This is not like rolling up a traditional street gang or even in a traditional extremist network, right? It's very different than that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know the FBI and law enforcement, I guess you could say they're relatively late to the game. By the time they've got enough information, we're able to arrest some people like Alameda in New York, which, spiraled into more investigative angles for them to figure out what's going on. But what comes to me is a lot of this information has been known. The internet has gone rogue. I mean, you can literally do whatever you want on there nowadays, even the black net and things such as that. But, it goes all the way back. I mean, you mentioned in the beginning of your show, an FBI informant created this platform with $140,000, been paid. Right. So that was kind of like the starts and the origin of that. And so it looks like it just keeps spiraling. And we're going to have to, or the government's going to have to come out and figure out how to prevent people from getting on these platforms and being able to do the type of terror they're able to do almost unnoticed. It's crazy.
Yeah. The problem from my view is I do know that the head of Telegram he's I believe he has a criminal case in France, but I'm glad that the cases are getting prosecuted. I know that the investigating agents are doing a noble job in terms of going after these people. But the way it's getting dealt with it's not getting dealt with on a systemic level. And the way it's getting promoted it makes the hair on the back of my head, on my back of my neck stand up.
Well, I think for all fairness, if we're going back to 2003 with an FBI informant, then there's been numerous presidential administrations that have either bypassed on this topic, didn't know enough about this topic, didn't fund it enough, researched it enough, however you want to do it, safeguards put it into place. This isn't just something that's happened current. I just think it's known now because there's been some arrest about it and they're doing what they can. I know the FBI recently labeled this nihilistic violence that we're seeing as a level 1 threat. So they've been deemed a modern day terrorist network. So at the end of the day, regardless of anybody's political views, right side, left side, we all have to put the political differences to the side and do what's best for the kids in our country and all around the world, because it's not just here in the United States. This is an international related issue as well. And so whatever the political views are or distancing or however they want to do it, that all needs to go to the side. We got to come down to common sense of what we can do and fight this all together as a group. I mean, we have to unite because our children are legitimately at risk every single day that they wake up, every time they go on and play a video game. And it's scary as hell. And it should scare every parent out there. And so my hope is that both sides of the aisle, whether it's current administration, the next administration, 2 or 3 administrations above that we don't even know about, I hope that they can reach to the other side of the aisle and come up to work together on a workable solution to fix this, because this is literally one of the crazier things that I've heard. I mean, look, there's a lot of crazy stuff that goes
Yeah.
on in this world, but this one is definitely up on the top of that list.
Yeah, I've dealt with. I mean, look, I covered my first homicide a couple weeks before I turned 22. Um, I've dealt most of my career was spent doing law enforcement reporting. I've dealt with a lot of extremists in my time, and I do think that this is some of the more damaging stuff that I've ever covered. There are colleagues of mine who are in therapy for the stuff that they've seen and had to go through while reporting on this, and these are experienced journalists who've dealt with very rough situations in the past. It's not pleasant, and honestly, with a murder, it's easier to understand and come across because the victim is dead. In this case, oftentimes the victims are when they don't kill themselves, the hearing about the sort of abuse and manipulation they describe is really rending. Um, I mean, it makes a mess of a person, and I think that the ultimate to me the ultimate responsibility, aside from the exploiter, really does lie in the platform.
Yeah.
It lies with the
I mean,
platforms and the
it's insane to me.
people
You
who are
got
making money.
watch parties nowadays. You have kids getting online, teenagers,
Yep.
young adults online, teaming up and bullying a kid to stab themselves in the leg, or tattoo or carve something into their skin so they can see the fat, crushing the animal. Or what about the kid in Washington that went at 4 o'clock in the morning and hung himself in a parking lot at a grocery
Yep.
store? And
Yep.
being encouraged this whole entire time. I know you've taken a deep dive into looking into some of these watch parties. What platforms are being used for that?
A lot of them are video calls on Discord.
Discord?
A lot of them are video. A lot of them are video calls on Discord. Or the initial congregation is done on Discord, and they'll jump over to Jitsi or another platform. But yeah, I mean, it's rough. Um, I've seen a lot of videos of these watch parties. I mean, honestly, there was one video I watched of a guy who got raided by the cops in England and live streamed. I mean, he live streamed his own arrest, essentially, or at least the audio of it. So sometimes you can hear things on them that you would not expect. But yeah, it does happen. Discord is unfortunately very central to this.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I've
I
heard
would
they're trying to put in some checks and balances of what they can. I know they've kicked some members off that they deem to be a part of these online extremists. Um, but I also have heard things where they're able to relatively put some sort of uh, technology on their computers or their gaming devices that every time they, let's say, text something to a child or send something to a child, that it deletes itself. So they're able to stay hidden and continue
yeah.
on that platform.
Yeah, these actors are relatively sophisticated about how to stay ahead of detection, like the automated detection on the social applications where they tend to congregate and exploit people. Cadenhead himself had several, if not dozens, of different identities and aliases that he used to get back on Discord, even after he was banned. So he was able to work around that particular block, and I think that's, from my understanding, it's still a challenge.
So I know we're coming up to the close of the end of the time that we have here. But one of the big questions I have for you, because I know you are an expert in this for the last 10 years, is there anything you can say, warn the parents out there of their children, or any of the audience that's listening, ways to protect themselves, ways to protect their household, their information, their kids, and keeping them safe? If you could go off on that, that would be fantastic.
Sure. I don't want to tell anybody how to parent, but I do think first off, it's really worthwhile considering how early you want your child to go online. Um, some people I know, quite a few people I know, actually will not give a child their own device until they're basically in high school. Um, but that being said, it is worthwhile educating your kids about who to interact with when you're online, what games you play. Okay, so you play Roblox. Who are you talking to on Roblox? What are you allowing? What sort of parental controls are on there? Make sure that they turn them all the way up. Restrict their ability to chat with people who are not folks that they know in from real life. I think that realistically, you know, when I think about this problem, honestly, I just think people need to spend more time offline. And I think kids need to spend more time offline. I know that there's a bigger conversation about how to do that. In New York City, for instance, phones have been banned in high school, and it's turned out quite well. The kids appear to like that, but that's not a deeper fix. I think that parents really need to not abdicate the responsibility of raising your kid to a screen. I think you need to pay more attention to what your kids' social media accounts are.
Yeah, I would agree.
Whether or not they're allowed to have them. Talk to them about what does happen here. Talk to them about the fact that there are people who you should not speak with online. And there are forums that there are areas and points of congregation that you should probably stay out of. Again, I'm not a professional in that respect, but I do think that education is important, and I do think that schools and youth organizations should prioritize informing children about this stuff to the appropriate degree. Not, you don't need to get them into all the gory details, but at the same time, if they know about the fact that this stuff is out there, it means that they're not going to be as susceptible to victimization. Also, I think that it's really important to note who these groups target, to the fact that they tend to go after vulnerable children. And if there are kids who have, mental health challenges of their own, or challenges about their own personal or questions about their own identity, whether it's sexual, gender, whatever you may have, that their parents, have a conversation with their kids about this stuff and listen. You may want to think about what you share about your life online. These people find their victims because their victims look to share. They are seeking affirmation. And maybe you shouldn't be sharing your life with strangers online. And I think that's just a basic point of digital hygiene that we need to, it may have been common sense 20 years ago. I don't think I think that we've kind of gone in a different direction as a society now, and definitely for the worse.
Any immediate red flags as parents start looking through their kids' computers, gaming applications, phones, whatever, tablets, any immediate red flags that they should be looking for to kind of help them identify something that is out of control or a threat?
I mean, honestly, look, like if your kid has cuts on, if your kid is starting to scar up, like that's a really good sign. That's a really important thing to look for their physical health. If they're spending like way too much, like they're spending late nights on these apps, yeah, you should probably check on what time your kid's going to bed. I think that if people want to familiarize themselves with the symbology of these groups and the names, I don't think that's a bad thing, because then you can perhaps see it. But again, it changes so frequently, right? There's so many different subgroups and names that it would require people to stay up on this in a way that, frankly, I don't think they're capable. So I just think if your child starts to withdraw, if their entire social world is online, you typically do want to talk to them about that and maybe get a look at their friends and see what's going on. And if you see any abusive language like that tends to be what pops up when they're getting pushed out of the inner circle of these groups. That's you will see a change in the way that they're spoken to by their peers, and when they're trying to get back in, that's typically when they are coerced to exploit themselves. And clearly, if there's any Animal Crush or ultra violent content on your child's devices or social media accounts, that's when you just want to intervene right then and there. Because at that point, like, they're this close to CSAM material. Yeah, and once that's on their devices, that's just like when you have child pornography on your phone, like that's just a charge.
Right.
It's an automatic charge, pretty much. If somebody comes across it, if law enforcement comes across it, and you don't want to risk that. So it's just, again, I do think that there are people who are more capable of outlining what parents and youth organizations and schools should do in this respect, but never hurts.
Ali, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, explaining your expertise and your deep dive into all these topics. I think it's helpful for everybody to hear and listen to just how sick and twisted this world really is when it comes to online and being able to protect our kids. So I can't thank you enough for coming on this show. I really do appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, brother. Now that we've had a chance to listen to Ali and all the deep information he has based on the subjects, how this was created, and how it's just evolved over time, it's scary. And again, we're just trying to bring awareness to this topic, be able to bring you information so you can identify not only the threats that are going on in this world, but what your kid might come up on when they're playing online in these Discord and Roblox and these Minecraft and all these various online platforms. You definitely need to be paying attention to what they're doing. Look, if you look into your phone, your child's phone, their tablet, their computer, their gaming devices, whatever that is that they're online, when you as the parent go ahead and you take a look at it, and if you find something that is super suspicious to you, you see the demeanor change in your child, you see the harm they might be doing, whatever it is that triggers you, start by calling your local law enforcement. Start there. Call them up and report it, because you never know. You could be saving your own child. You could be saving another child. So if there's something that is there, report it immediately. If you want to escalate it and take it up to the FBI has a website, www.ic3.gov. Again, it's www.ic3.gov. You can report it directly to the FBI, but I would start with your local law enforcement. They're getting to be pretty knowledgeable in the online world and can at least start connecting the dots of what they can, try to protect your family, get you some of the help and assistance that's needed. And I can assure you that those local law enforcement agencies are going to escalate things to the Attorney General's office all the way up to the federal level and try bringing down this disgusting, crazy network that is literally hunting our children online. So again, www.ic3.gov. That's the FBI's cybercrime, your local law enforcement agency. Protect yourself, protect your kids. We will be back, and as we have more on this topic, we'll bring it to you. Until then, see you soon. Thank you for listening.